The sun spilled over the parched hills like honey gone bitter, stretching its gold across the cracked earth of Calico Ridge. A few crickets chirped in the stillness, but even they seemed too tired to sing for long. Dust clung to every surface, windowsills, saddle leather, even the tired eyelids of men who'd seen too many droughts and not enough miracles. Jedediah Holt rode slow into town that morning, not because his old sorrel mare lacked spirit, but because he himself had learned the wisdom of quiet movement. He was a man shaped by silence, the kind carved deep by years alone, working the land, burying a wife, and watching livestock wither faster than hope. His ranch sat 10 miles west, hugging the edges of land too stubborn to grow cotton but too sacred to leave. He'd come today for a horse, something strong enough to pull the plow and drag the winter feed. The town was louder than he remembered. Children darted around wagons, chasing a tin hoop. An old man hawked bitter apples for 2 cents apiece. And at the center of it all, the auction yard, where beasts were bought and broken with the same coin. Jed dismounted and tied the mare to a post. He touched his hat brim, nodding once to the liveryman, then stepped into the crowd where men pressed in shoulder to shoulder. On the platform, the auctioneer was already swinging his cane, voice cutting through the heat like a blade. Next up, one gray mule, stubborn but strong. Been used for freight, tolerates dogs, hates thunder. A small murmur ran through the crowd as the mule was led forward. But it wasn't the animal that held Jed's attention. No, it was the girl tethered behind it, rope loose around one wrist. She couldn't have been more than 19, though hardship had aged her eyes. She stood barefoot, knees scraped, dress so tattered it barely hung together at the seams. Her cheeks were streaked with old tears and new dust, and her collarbone jutted out sharp beneath skin pale from lack of light. Yet her posture remained upright. Not proud, not defiant, just enduring. A few in the crowd laughed. One man leaned over and said to another, "Guess it's buy one, get one ruined." The other spat in agreement. The auctioneer lifted a hand for silence. "Gentlemen, for today only, a package deal, mule and mouth to feed. She cooks, sews, and keeps quiet. What more can a man ask for?" Jed's jaw tightened. He'd seen the world lose its mercy 1 inch at a time, but something about this felt too close, too familiar. The bidding stalled. No one wanted the mule. No one wanted the girl even more. And then, through the quiet, she spoke. Her voice wasn't loud. It was a breath, a prayer, the echo of a life not yet extinguished. "Please," she said, eyes fixed on Jed. "Please take me instead." The world shrank in that moment. The town fell away. There was only the girl, the mule, and the ache in Jed's chest he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. He didn't answer. He looked away, turned back toward his mare. It wasn't his problem. He didn't need a girl. He needed a horse. The auctioneer scoffed. "Guess the silence speaks for itself. No takers." Jed heard the girl's breath hitch, soft as the rustle of a fallen leaf. And something in him broke. Not loudly, not with drama, but with the soft finality of a dam giving way beneath long-held strain. He turned back, reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the last of his silver. A small pouch, hard-earned, hard-kept. He stepped forward and set it on the auction block. "I'll take both," he said, voice even. "The mule and the girl." There was a hush. Then the laughter started again, meaner now, but more distant somehow. Jed didn't look at them. He looked at her. The auctioneer shrugged, snatched the coins, and handed him the rope. "She's yours. No returns." Jed untied the rope from her wrist without speaking. She flinched, expecting the worst. He only shook his head and pulled off his coat, worn, frayed, but warm, and draped it over her shoulders without touching her skin. She didn't look him in the eye. She looked at the ground. At her bare feet. At the mule. Anywhere but at him. He turned and began to walk. Slowly. Giving her the choice to follow. For a second she didn't move. Then she wrapped the coat tighter around herself, lifted her chin a fraction, and stepped off the platform. They walked side by side through town, the silence between them not cold, but heavy with meaning. People watched. The butcher's wife whispered something sharp to the blacksmith's daughter. A boy laughed and pointed. But Clara kept walking. Clara. That was the name Jed gave her in his head. She hadn't told him yet, but somehow, it already suited her. Something gentle beneath grit. Something strong that hadn't yet shown its full shape. At the wagon, he helped her up without a word. The mule followed, as if it too had found something worth walking toward. The road out of town stretched long and golden in the dying light. The hills rolled lazy beneath the sky, and the wind picked up, soft, like fingers through hair. Jed took the reins. The girl sat beside him, still wrapped in his coat. She didn't thank him. He didn't expect her to. But after a mile or two, she asked softly, "Do you live alone?" He nodded. 10 miles west. She was quiet a long time. Then she said, "I don't take up much room." Jed glanced sideways. Her eyes were on the horizon, not on him. But her voice had a new weight to it, not fear, but the beginning of hope. "No one takes up more than they're worth," he said, not looking at her either. She didn't smile, but her shoulders eased. And Jed, for the first time in years, felt like maybe the land wasn't the only thing that could be healed. As the sun dipped low behind the hills, they rode on, two souls neither rescued nor ruined, just beginning to remember what it meant to be seen. The wind sang low across the prairie as they reached the ranch, a single-lantern home nestled in the shadow of brittle hills. The land was dry but not dead, hanging on the way Jedediah Holt did, without complaint, without flourish, by sheer will. Clara stepped down from the wagon, her legs unsteady, as if she hadn't felt solid ground beneath her in years. The house stood plain. Whitewashed wood, porch slightly slanted, windows staring out like watchful eyes. No fence lined the property. Only the horizon framed it. Jed led the mule to the lean-to, unhooking the reins in silence. He gave Clara space, not from coldness but caution. Her presence was something delicate, not in body but in spirit. A creature that flinched at sudden moves, not because she was weak, but because she'd learned what followed them. She didn't speak much that first night. He showed her the spare room, small but clean, with a narrow bed and one woolen blanket folded at its foot. She ran her fingers along the windowsill, where dust gathered in corners like secrets. When she closed the door behind her, it clicked with the quiet finality of a chapter ending. Days fell into a rhythm. Clara woke early, sometimes before the sun, and made coffee so bitter it cut through the morning chill. She scrubbed the floors without being asked, swept the porch each evening, and stitched the holes in Jed's shirts with neat, invisible seams. She never asked where things belonged, she just seemed to know. Jed noticed how she moved like someone who never wanted to be in the way, who had learned to disappear without vanishing. Jed worked the land with the same stubborn grace he always had. He'd stop at midday and find a plate waiting on the porch, a heel of bread, some fried beans, water-cooled with mint leaf. She never hovered, just left it there and vanished like morning mist. It was on the third Sunday that someone came calling. A neighbor from 5 miles east, a man named Brig with a mean streak that always rode ahead of him. He arrived on horseback, chewing tobacco and grinning like he owned the sky. "So this the girl from the sale?" Brig asked, eyes trailing Clara as she stood barefoot by the water barrel. Jed didn't answer, just leaned against the doorframe and watched the man watching her. Brig chuckled. "She don't look like much. But I suppose for the price, can't be too picky." Jed's jaw flexed. "You came for something or just to run your mouth?" Brig raised both hands in mock surrender. "Just checking in on an old friend. Shame though, thought you were smarter than to drag trouble back to your doorstep." Clara didn't flinch, but Jed saw the faint tightening of her fingers around the tin pail. "She's not trouble," Jed said. Brig snorted. "Sure she ain't." That night, Clara didn't join him for supper. Her plate remained untouched, the beans cooling in their skillet. Jed found her later sitting behind the barn, knees pulled to her chest, staring up at the moon. He didn't speak. Just sat beside her, close enough for silence to feel shared. After a while, she whispered, "They used to say I was cursed. That anything I touched broke. I believed it." Jed looked at her, really looked. The way her collarbones rose like wings ready to unfold. The way her voice shook not with fear, but exhaustion. "There's not a soul breathing who ain't broken something," he said. "But that don't mean they're cursed." She nodded slowly, as if she'd been waiting for someone to say that her whole life. The next week brought a heat wave. The crops withered under a sky so hot the clouds seemed to burn. Jed tried to haul water from the creek, but the mule balked. They needed shade. Clara was the one who saw it, the small curl of smoke rising from the shed out back. She ran without thinking, skirts hiked, bare feet pounding dirt. Jed was already halfway there when the door exploded open in a whoosh of flame. The beam caught him as he lunged forward, pinning him at the ankle. Fire licked the walls. The mule screamed from its tether. "Jed!" Clara's voice cracked. "Get back," he shouted. "It's too dangerous." But she didn't listen. She grabbed a rusted crowbar from the ground and drove it under the beam, heaving with all she had. The muscles in her arms strained, face streaked with soot, hair singed at the ends. The wood groaned, shifted. Jed pushed with his one free leg. Together they moved it. He limped out into the open air, half collapsing into her arms. The sky above them was thick with smoke, but the shed still stood, barely. She knelt beside him, eyes wild, hands blistered. "You're safe," she breathed. "You're safe." And then, she cried, not the quiet kind she'd trained herself to bury, but the kind that stormed from her chest, raw and full. Jed didn't speak. He reached for her hand and held it, callous to callous. No promises. No poetry. Just presence. The town heard about it, of course. The girl who saved Holt from the fire. The same girl who'd once been sold beside a mule. They still whispered, but the tone shifted. "That girl's made of grit," someone said at the general store. "Carved from bone and smoke," another replied. Jed and Clara never spoke of what changed that day. But something had. He noticed how she started humming again while she cooked. How she left her door open at night. How her laughter came sometimes, thin, fleeting, but real. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sky bruise into night, Jed said, "The fence out west needs mending." Clara looked up. "Want help?" He nodded. "I'll saddle the mule," she said, and rose. As she walked away, he caught the faint curve of her smile in the fading light. They were not healed. They were not whole. But they were trying, and in a land as unforgiving as this, that was more than enough. When the stars blinked alive above them, Jed leaned back in his chair, eyes soft, and let the silence between them speak of things neither of them knew how to say yet, things like belonging, like dignity, like love born not in grand gestures, but in staying when it's easier to leave. And somewhere deep in the hush of the prairie, the earth exhaled, quiet and full.